This podcast is part of the Shareable Podcast Network. Learn more at shareable.fm. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, but rarely do successful people get from point A to point B taking the most direct route. Host Jeffrey Klein speaks to a diverse mix of people to explore their story of success and the dots connected along the way. Thank you for listening. Here's your host, Jeffrey.
This episode is all about listening to your mother, or my mother, as I have a great conversation with my mother, Emmy Miller, an amazing coach who understands that story creates an environment for context and can provide a metaphor in business. Now, she does understand also that not everyone is open to coaching. You really have to be willing to be uncomfortable and be vulnerable, and that the best leaders are in fact vulnerable and ask questions instead of always having the answers. Finally, she really embraces the need for cultural understanding of people's different beliefs so that you can facilitate better communication between different people. Thanks so much and enjoy. My guest today is Emmy Miller, co-founder and president of Liberty Business Strategies, a woman-owned boutique consulting firm that incorporates the best practices of human resources. Emmy has over 40 years experience in executive coaching, change and transition management, strategic planning, leadership development, and organizational effectiveness. Emmy's work spans across many industries and in various size companies. Just to name a few of her clients over the years: GlaxoSmithKline, Bala Consulting Engineers, legal firm Cooley, Quaker Houghton, CertaPro Painters, Fast Signs, Planned Parenthood, and the International Monetary Fund, to name but a few. Her work focuses on achieving tangible business results and creating lasting impact in her clients' organizations. Known for her direct, constructive feedback and insight, she holds her clients accountable for making change. She has served on the National Board of the Human Resources People and Strategy and the Forum of Executive Women, as well as being a board member of the Broad Street Ministry. Emmy is a certified coach by the International Coaching Federation. Emmy and her husband, Avi, enjoy spending time with their 10 grandchildren and their dog, Poochie, and most days she finds a way to a cappuccino, something she says she cannot live without. For me, all these amazing accolades pale in comparison to her role in shaping her 3 grown sons, of which I am honored to be one of them. Please welcome Emmy.
Thanks, Jeffrey. That was lovely.
Well, you are lovely, so that should make sense. Now, I like to start at the beginning, so we go with where were you born and what did your parents do for a living?
I was born in Heidelberg, Germany, and my dad is an electrical engineer. Well, he was. He's passed away. And my mother was a homemaker, and at times she was a bookkeeper and a translator, especially when she came to America.
Well, she also worked for Lippincott. I'm so familiar with her Lippincott years. What did she do there?
She did translation.
Is that bookkeeping?
Well, no, she did translation. So she could translate from Russian and German and Polish. And those are pretty easy things for her to do.
As someone who is not particularly versed with foreign languages, I found that super impressive. So growing up, you were an immigrant, although you moved to America when you were just a baby.
Right.
Did you, like a lot of people growing up, at least in my experience, kind of think, oh, when I grow up, I want to be this? Did you have any kind of ideas about what you want to do when you were growing up?
You know, I don't remember. I just remember creating plays and entertaining kids. And then as I got older, since my dad was an engineer, I grew up loving math. And so I majored in that in college, and I figured I'd do something in that vein.
But you didn't. We'll get to that in a bit. So your dad was an engineer. It sounds like he may have been one of your role models. Was there anyone else who kind of was a role model growing up in terms of you seeing a path to something you might want to do?
I would say I had different role models for different things. So I had a role model for parenting for a friend of mine who was 15 years older than I was and had 3 kids. I had a different role.
I should thank her.
Pardon me?
I should thank her for your.
You should. She's still around. She's still a good friend. And I had a different role model for literature in terms of I grew up with a mother demanding that I read international literature. So as most parents wouldn't let their kids read Nabokov, my mother wanted me to read Nabokov because he was a great Russian author, and I had to read Tolstoy. So I had a very varied, and to a degree, a very un-American childhood.
Well, one thing that I think is universal from my perspective is the ability to tell stories. And so you talk about these authors. Is there anyone who you grew up with who were particularly good at telling stories?
I heard stories, and this probably reflects how old I am, but I remember storytelling and being compelled by them on the radio. They used to tell stories. In fact, I think the NPR still reads stories on the radio, and I found that to be just fascinating.
Any particular story you recall that you thought like that really kind of, or subject matter that was interesting to you?
Well, I think naturally I'm interested in immigration and people coming to the United States and adapting. And so stories about people from other countries coming here have always been interesting to me.
So, as someone who's not a first generation immigrant, how is your childhood different as it related to being from a different, born in a different country? Did that play a big role?
It did. First of all, it played a role in how I was dressed. I was dressed as a very good little girl who grew up in Russia or Poland or Germany. And so that's the kind of clothing my mother picked out for me. It also played a role in terms of I was very early expected to be focused on the arts. And I didn't grow up with any American stories, kindergarten stories, or those kind of things. I only really grew up with listening to fairy tales that were in Polish and Russian. And I think my parents' home was very different than any of the homes around us in terms of how it was decorated, how we celebrated things. So my parents didn't really assimilate all that well and didn't feel the need to assimilate. They embraced the country, but they were very much of the tradition of where they came from.
And so was your response to that to embrace the same perspective, or did you find yourself kind of rebelling against that and wanting to assimilate more?
Oh, definitely wanting to assimilate more. I embraced it by rebelling. I was quite a rebellious child.
Oh,
much to my parents' dismay, because again, that was not what good European kids would do.
What give us an example of one of your rebellious actions?
Well, a mild one was that my mother wanted me to wear braids and a big bow in my hair, and I went off one day and got my hair cut.
Didn't you also color your hair at one point?
Not till I was much, much, much older.
What about, there's an impression, I think, about immigrants and about Europeans, the work ethic that came to America. Were you compelled to find a job, and what was kind of your first paying job?
Well, I was compelled to find a job, but it was more because, going back to rebellion, I wanted independence. And so I had a great job as a bank teller for Philadelphia Society, PSFS. I forget what the F stood for savings. And that was an interesting job as a teller. And I sold clothing at a boutique store. But I always wanted to make my own money and be independent.
And you talked about your interest in the arts and literature, as well as your interest in math, and it seems like you had this kind of duality. How did you decide to kind of pursue, not a math career, or based on math, but more of a personal and finding to, that how did coaching kind of come as part of what you ended up doing?
Well, again, I picked math because it was easy for me, and I had a father who loved it. I mean, I used to play with a slide rule, which they don't use anymore. And, but I also loved art and art history. And so I thought about becoming an art historian, but my drive to be financially independent felt that I had to go into business, and that's what drove me into business. In terms of coaching, that was an accident. I was doing some teamwork for a client in information technology, since I knew that space. And they asked me to coach the CIO, Chief Information Officer. And it was something I hadn't thought about. There wasn't a lot of literature. This is back in 1990. And it turned out to be a really wonderful assignment. Wonderful meaning that the goals that they set out for this CIO were met, and he really flourished in his job. And so that really kicked in this passion for helping others. I also found out that children who go through and are immigrants tend to find, particularly immigrants from the Holocaust era, tend to go into helping roles. And I guess I fit that.
So where's, you've done a lot of travel, and you've worked with lots of different kinds of companies. What's the most kind of surprising place you found yourself, whether it's a location or engaging with a particular person through your kind of experience?
Well, I have traveled a lot. I think it's not so much the most surprising, but traveling the train, which I do, well, I used to do before COVID, to New York and Washington every week. I met incredible people who were really very much wanting to do some things in their life, and particularly in things for other people. And I think that's been the most surprising and delightful experience I had. In fact, one of my clients was somebody I met on the train and struck up a conversation. He had just been suggested by his company that he hire a coach. And by the time we got off the train, I was hired.
The train. Well, and I know just to me, when I think about some of the places you've gone as a result, or clients you've had in far-flung places. I mean, you go to Washington, D.C. a lot, but you've also had clients in the Middle East and clients in Europe. And there's a whole cultural perspective, I think, because you probably have some more ease with than maybe people who are, typical Americans. How has kind of culture played into how you coach people from other places?
Well, it's very interesting you asked that question, because I coach for several multilateral organizations. You mentioned the IMF. I also do the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, which is Latino Hispanic area. And what's interesting to me is even in places like that, where there's multiple cultures. So you can have somebody who's in India and managing somebody from France being managed by somebody from Germany. And understanding what part of the behavior is culturally influenced is very helpful in terms of helping clients manage people.
And in terms of managing people, because this is something I talk about in terms of communication, do you think that, being able to communicate or tell an effective story is a skill that you can develop, or is it something that you either innately have or you don't?
I think most skills, including storytelling, can be developed. I think that storytelling is underrated. And
I agree with that.
No, I really do. And in fact, sometimes when I try to shift clients, when I work with clients who are trying to communicate something, and many of them have PhDs or MDs or other advanced degrees, and they are wanting to go to the technical part of the presentation, I bring them back to the story, the concept of a story, and remind them that some of the most powerful and influential things have been done because of story. So if you look at if you look in Rome at some of the beautiful things Michelangelo did, that was telling a story. If you look at a powerful message, I was in India and looking at the pathway that Gandhi took. It made it more powerful because we knew about the story. And so it creates an environment and a context for people, and sometimes a metaphor for people that they can relate to much quicker than if they were just given a chart of numbers.
Well, that is preaching to the choir, because I try and share that message of the need for story over information. And not that information isn't important, because clearly there are times where you need to express it. But I believe that if you do it in a narrative form, there's science behind the fact of how it connects with people, in terms of them understanding what you're talking about and remembering it, which is what we're trying to do in business. In terms of coaching, do you think anyone can benefit from having a professional coach?
Well, that's like asking me, can anyone benefit from learning? Some people do, and some people obviously don't. But it's interesting that in the last couple of years, the concept of coaching has become much more accepted. So you have people like Gates, you have people like Antal Wally talking about the value of having a coach. Now, that's part one, the coaching relationship. But the important part of it is for what and how will it be different? So it's always the so what, then what question that I ask clients and companies. And sometimes for certain things, a coach is not appropriate.
Mm-hmm. And what about the is everyone coachable? Which is a different question.
Not everyone. People who are closed and really do not want to take advice are not coachable. You want someone that is open to learning and open to being uncomfortable to grow.
Mm-hmm. And so you've worked with a lot of high-powered, C-suite level people. Do you find, on average, when you have resistance from the kind of more, there's I think a perception of, CEOs and people in leadership roles are not always people who want to have advice from others. And I would think that there's those that I would call, open, and they're probably more successful leaders than the ones that don't. Do you find that more challenging to have people who are used to giving out orders and giving out advice and telling people what to do as opposed to being open to listening to someone else?
Well, I think there's part of that. I think that someone who's a CEO or in the C-suite is used to having the answers. And one of the things that we work on is really, that's something that you need to have at a lower level, at a supervisory level. By the time you get to be a CEO or in that C-suite, the power you have is in the type of questions and being open to listening to other points of view and being vulnerable. And that's something that feels counterintuitive to some people. But when they practice it and look at it, they find that it's very, very powerful for them.
What do you find is the biggest challenge in being a coach or in coaching someone?
Well, you have to have a fast start because they want to get going. And so the concept of going slow to go fast is something that you want to present, because no one's going to be a cookie cutter leader. Everyone's going to be the best leader they can be for who they are. And so there has to be a short period of time where you have to get to know them. And you also have to understand the culture of the organization that they want to be successful
in. And so is the challenge that people are impatient?
They're impatient, yes. And also, depending on where they are, sometimes it can be tough, because one of the things that you're doing is you're asking them to look at long-held beliefs to see if they continue to support them or they don't.
What do you find on the flip side? What do you find the most rewarding part about being a coach?
Oh, so many things. I love it. And the reason is because you watch somebody really open up. There's a woman from MIT wrote a book called The Third Opinion. The only reason I know I'm successful is if that person I'm coaching meets their goals, not my goals. And so watching that happen is just the most satisfying thing I can imagine.
And how do you define success? And it's meant to be open-ended. So you could call it success in life or success in coaching, but if someone said to you, how do you define success? How would you respond?
I don't define success. The person I'm working with defines success. The organization defines success. And I'm there to facilitate that as a thinking partner, as an accountability partner.
Let me throw it back to, how do you define success for yourself outside the coaching, in life?
Well, I have been very fortunate. As you mentioned, I have 3 kids. And for me, one of the things that was always important to me was to see my kids be successful, and hopefully more successful than I am, and have wonderful lives. And that's always been my North Star. I mean, I love my work, as you know, being my son. I'm passionate about it. But the most important thing to me is the kids and their children.
I'll quickly move on to what, and maybe it's related, what inspires you?
What inspires me is the chance to really feel that I'm making a difference for a broad range of people or an organization. Because when you coach at the top, it has a cascading effect. So if someone is more empathetic, if someone is more successful aligning their team, someone's faster in getting a drug to market, like we're watching now, that is success. And if I can play a role in that, then I feel very gratified about that.
What one piece of advice would you have given to your 21-year-old self?
Well, that's a tough question. I think being confident and being open to know that you don't know everything.
And what's kind of next in the trend of kind of professional development or coaching? What do you see as, you said in the last couple of years, it's become more, accepted that the power of coaching. Where do you think things are going from here?
Well, it's a very exciting time for coaching. For one thing, as Thomas Friedman wrote in his several books ago, the world is flat and fast now. And so because of that, and COVID has accelerated that movement, people are really struggling. There's no right or wrong way to do things. There's no list of things that you're supposed to do, because things are changing all the time. And so everything is becoming much more diverse. So the idea of having a good cultural IQ is something we're promoting very heavily now, because we're finding it very important, is very exciting, is to help multinational group, sometimes meeting for the first time, but they have to go and do something like develop drugs or like generate new technology or pivot to COVID, and helping them become a powerful team together. And so understanding where they come from, understanding the cultural biases. In fact, there was a physicist, and so I minored in physics, talked about the fact that he just died a couple of years ago, that culture is really, evolving a culture is the most important thing right now in terms of helping support our future. And so having a part in that is exciting. Not only is it diverse by different cultures, but it's diverse by different ages. And one of the things that's so fascinating now is a lot of the baby boomers are retiring. And so how do you engage them in mentoring and talk to them about legacy and help support the upcoming young leaders? It's a great time to be a coach.
And in terms of legacy and from, you've had a very fulfilling career, what's kind of next for you?
Just what I'm doing. I'm having a blast. Really, succession planning, doing multicultural work. That's really what I see as the next next areas that we're going to be challenged with, and understanding technology and understanding how technology can enable communications.
Well, here we are on a Zoom call. There's proof in the pudding. Okay, so this is the part where we do 9 rapid fire questions, although not as rapid fire as I intend them to be. So just kind of, off the cuff. Some may require a little more thought. But is it better to be a planner or a doer?
It's better to be what you're good at and have somebody else compliment you.
Oh, I like that answer. Should
It's true.
stories always have a happy ending?
Stories need to be, you need to take out of a story what is important and is useful. If they have a happy ending, that's fine. If they don't, what did the person learn? What are the gifts that came out of that story?
Do you have a favorite emoji?
I do use emojis. And my favorite one is sending a kiss to my kids and my grandkids. So it's more on a personal basis.
That's if you had to sing a song for karaoke, and I sometimes alter this question. Do you have a favorite song? Because some people don't like to sing karaoke. But what would you select as a song that moves you?
Grover Washington was a wonderful musician that my children and I knew growing up. And he did The Two of Us with Bill Winters. And I think that's one of the songs that I find very soothing.
Love that song. Do you have a favorite social media platform?
No, I use LinkedIn mostly because I use the social media primarily for business.
Mm-hmm. Can you name, and I know this is going to be a tough question because I know how much you like to read books, but can you name a book that left a lasting impression on you? Name one book. I know there are many.
I know that's tough. How about two?
Okay, I'll give you two.
Well, one is The Night by Elie Wiesel, which is a very powerful book, which really talked about how his role was in taking care of someone who was an arch enemy, and how they both learned about the humanness of each other. And the other one for business was the seminal book by Peter Drucker, who was I think it's called The Executive, or The Competent Executive.
We'll put it in the show notes, make sure we get the right one. Can you name one of now I love movies, so can you name one of your favorite movies?
I'm not as big a movie goer as I used to be, and I think what I can think of is parts of movies, like The King and I know that might strike you as odd, but it was about Thailand, and it was fascinating to me about how someone acclimated to another culture, and how the culture thrived by not putting up walls, as many countries do, but opening up the place so that they can really grow. And that's how that became their strength. So I love that movie for that reason.
Love that. What's one thing you can't live without?
Air.
And I'm going to say other than cappuccino, because that was something you mentioned.
That is something I really like to have. There's nothing I can't live without except air.
Okay. Very practical answer. If you could be credited with inventing something, what would it be and why?
Well, I think if I were to invent something, it would have to be something that would help other people. And I can't, and right now it would be something that would help people live well together and collaborate.
That's the end of the questions there. So you've successfully, navigated the 9 rapid fire questions.
Good, that I can have.
Is there anything in particular you're promoting in terms of, you think I think you talked about cultural IQ. Is there somewhere people could find out information or reach out to you? What's the best way for people to kind of connect with you?
Well, I don't think we've actually quite updated our website, but there's one person that we have brought on in the last year by the name of Ann Kabuzzi, who's certified in an instrument that we are finding to be very powerful. So they can either contact me or, well, I guess the best thing is to contact me, and I will, based on what they really want to do, I'll direct them either to her or to other people.
Through LinkedIn seems to be one powerful way.
LinkedIn is fine. Yep. Website, I think, if it works.
Sorry. this has been awesome. And, I speak too often, but this has been a little different than our usual conversations. And I just want to say thank you for being open and sharing, your perspectives and your successes. And I want to thank you for helping us connect the dots.
You're most welcome.
Thank you for taking your time to listen to this podcast. Please subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss any future episodes. If you could also do me a favor and please leave a review on iTunes, I would really appreciate that. Remember, story matters and is the best way to connect the dots.